You did a good job.
We are live. Welcome to Charm Policy and Charm Audit Review. I'm joined today with Antonio Rosales, Matt Ruzek, Amir, and myself, Marco Chepi. If you guys want to just quickly introduce yourselves.
You did a good job.
We are live. Dang it, that was me.
Yep. So I work with Untitled Solutions team with Marco and Matt and Amir.
I'm a Juju Charmer.
I am Juju Charmer for Big Data.
Awesome. I'm also a Charmer as well. So I don't know, which one should we start with first? Should we do the audit, or should we talk about Charm Policy Review?
Let's talk about policy so we can then figure out how we can make that wrap that into our audit.
Okay, cool. Let's do that. I'll pull up the current policy page.
Great. The one topic that I want to bring up today that has been causing me a lot of heartburn and I've gotten questions on that we've been trying to go back and forth is specifically as we try to get trusty charms is the topic of testing. And back in December, George Castro sent a policy suggestion to the Juju list about, hey, quality needs to be first and foremost. The Juju Solutions team is trying to figure out how we can make automated testing in there, and we're about there. We've spent some time, Marco Chepi and Tim and others have spent some time to be able to create an amulet tool, which is basically a test harness for making it easier for charm authors to write tests in their charms themselves. And so we have a lot of the infrastructure we need to be able to have tests within charms and hopefully make it easier for charm authors to develop tests in charms. A year ago, we really didn't have that many charms that had tests in them. Some folks would write some unit tests in their charms, but it was very ad hoc. And so we're just trying to make that more streamlined, a lot more easier. And so with that, we'd like to be able to, as the proposal made back in December of 2013, make that part of policy. Why that's important is we'd like to be able to make sure that the charm has unit and functional tests. So at any point when there's a new Ubuntu version or new upstream sources or a new cloud provider that we added onto, we can quickly test that charm and have a good feeling that that charm is running well. And so when anyone else comes to deploy it, they can have that good feeling. They can see the test output, see it's going. If it fails, we can take a look real quickly at it as anyone else can. A bug report is generated, and we can see what we need to do to resolve it so that when someone else comes along to try it, they're not going to see this failure itself. It's also important as we try to move forward in releases, like we're trying to get charms down to trusty. How do we know this charm is going to work in there? What's our level of confidence to be able to recommend it? And we say recommend it as a trusty charm itself. And so that's the impetus of testing there. And the other part is when we're trying to do merge requests into an existing charm, if we have something that comes in, it'd be nice to have a CI system that has a merge request come in, it sees it, it tests that charm based off of the unit test and or functional test it has in there, and then it can give a report back saying, hey, this branch that you proposed in this charm actually broke, didn't run this test, and it failed here. And so that gives immediate feedback to the charm author who's trying to contribute what they need to go fix to be able to resolve it. So this can be run locally with the Charm Tools plugin. It can be run in our automated system via merge proposals, hopefully, and then it can run automatically in all our clouds to be able to see how the charms are performing, how they're testing in each cloud. And so I really think it's important to be able to have quality and be able to have a good known how our charms are doing as the ecosystem evolves around it with merge proposals and OS releases and new clouds come online. So while it's not in policy today, it has been proposed for policy. I think this would be one of the bigger policy changes in that. So that was one of the things that we had assigned in policy. I think that'd be a good topic of discussion.
So not only has it been proposed for policy, but it was actually accepted as policy in the original mailing list. Yeah, no one objected and several yays for it. So it has technically been accepted as a policy. We just have not added it yet, mainly because the testing story was mildly in flux. I think we have a better idea of that now, so we may want to, we should probably revisit and make that policy. I think we essentially broadened the term of testing to be more than just functional testing, which is, integration testing, which is what Amulet really is, to also include things like functional and unit testing as well as valid forms of tests for charms. Since we've expanded the definition, I don't see why we shouldn't make that a policy. We should probably double check with the list to make sure that everyone's still okay with that.
Yeah. I suggest we reply back to the original list that has the thread and history there to bring it back onto people's new inbox. So actually, as you reply in the inbox, I can see the previous thread. Let people know of the new infrastructure that's available for them to use and how it'll be used, and let them know how they can learn about writing tests for the charms and testing their charms locally and then submitting them in there. And then our roadmap going forward. The thing that we won't have immediately is the continuous integration on branch merge proposals. We'll hopefully get that in this Ubuntu 14.10 cycle, but it won't be available next week. We'll hopefully have automated charm testing in our clouds in the next couple of weeks, though. And so that will become very soon, where we can have an output of seeing how charms are testing on all our supported provider clouds like Join and Azure, HP Cloud, all those like there. But the continuous integration will come. But users will have the ability to be able to test locally with charm tools and the plugin, I think it's Juju Test. Is that correct, Marco?
Yeah, there's a part of charm tools is Juju Test command.
Yep. So I think that gives them. I think that gives the charm authors the tools they need to be able to start writing tests. And we do have a couple of Amulet charm schools on our events page already out there, and our resources link. If you go to juju.ubuntu.com, we can also in that mail list that when we go about the policy, we should reference the documentation you have for Amulet, so folks can learn how to get it written, and some couple charm examples that have Amulet-based tests. They can also use those as reference.
Okay, can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
This testing is for the charm author or the Juju user. I'll give you an example. For instance, we develop a Hadoop solution or big data solution. I like to add a test that at the end it would verify if the deployment was successful based on the criteria the user is going to define, like make sure this services is up, that services is up, the port are valid, and so on. Is this going to help me with it as a solution user?
I'll take a first stab at that question, then maybe I'll pass on Marco and Matt. The notion way that I envisioned it was more from the charm author to make sure at the unit level testing that the charm has that unit level that can actually do, bring up different config options. What I suggested is that it'd be nice if a charm can exercise its config and its relations. And so you're having a pretty good feeling that this charm deployed in different configurations and different relations is going to function well.
So basically,
my initial answer would be from the charm author's perspective to make sure the charm is functioning as they wrote it and intended it.
Okay, so
Matt,
it's a unit test.
Unit test, yes. We could put a little bit of functional. Amulet does allow you to do integration testing to be able to set that up there, to be able to connect to other charms, and a little bit of not as much functional testing as you want to, and we'll maybe have more sessions on when we actually have bundle level testing to be able to do more functional workload testing. You can, with Amulet, check to make sure data has been passed on the other side. You've created a relation to make sure that it's functioning as you've seen correctly in an integration test. Ultimately, what I like to see in the charms is that you can spin up the charm, it tests its most used relations, because it's one thing to say a charm deploys, but does it relate correctly? And can you config set the parameters correctly? And so if we can at least have a good confidence level that you can config set correctly, you can relate correctly, and you can verify the data came back on the other side, we have a better level of confidence that you can have different tests that says it relates to databases, it does config set, and they can go through each one of those pass or fails.
So could we have something like a final hook? Like everything's installed, all the relations has been called, and it's done. And at the end, Juju would call something like a final hook for a admin to write my own test scenario there to verify, to make sure all the deployment and relationship has been executed correctly. You understand what I mean?
You bring up a fantastic point. So I want to correct a little bit of terminology. So unit testing is just testing the code you've written. Amulet does integration testing. Does this service work with other services as the author of the test wants to? We've defined this new idea of functional testing, which we're speccing right now, which is a health check essentially, which is any time you can run a command against a service, and the service knows what it needs to have done in order to be running properly. So this
Marco, we
Sorry, I
lost
lost
you.
you.
Yeah, we lost your audio. Sorry, we still lost you.
Oh, Marco's gone.
Yeah, you have to
Um,
restart. I think
yeah.
we were just talking about the specific things that you have unit level testing, which you could have code coverage in your actual program itself. The
Right.
other point is being able to have integration tests, what's basically can you relate to another charm, which is integration test. And then the functional test, what you're trying to do more of, is actually what you're just talking about now, maybe on the bundle level, is being
Right.
able to check that health check to see how is the workload actually operating between the two, between a
Right.
relation. So if you have a
Right.
WordPress and a MySQL,
Like a
how is
deployment
it
test,
across
basically.
there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been working with Marco on this, and I'm familiar with the functional testing that we're talking about. But I think Amir, I think what we're what we oh, here's Marco. He can explain. But
without fail, my plugin will fail. Sorry.
You
Yeah.
were
So
just describing functional testing health checks,
yeah,
and you lost you.
yeah. So I always go on these really good tirades as soon as my Google plugin fails.
I had the same problem this morning. The whole session went down.
Get
Yeah. So
back now.
functional testing. Let's get back at it.
Yep.
So the idea being that you can write code, it wouldn't necessarily be a hook, and this would be really embodied better as an action, Juju actions when they land, but essentially you can write a set of tests that can be run on the unit or in the service anytime to make sure the service is running as you as the author expects it. Do I have the right number of processes running? Do I have proper configuration files in place? Anything you'd want to check for a sanity check. That's what we're speccing now, and I hope to have that spec out to the mailing list at the end of the week, so tomorrow. That kind of covers how we can do testing better in charms and not necessarily put the burden of outlining every workload that a charm should do inside the charm, but rather having a way for the charm to inspect if it's running the way it is described to be running by the author. So that as you deploy it in different scenarios, you can just run a health check. Is this charm running as the author thinks it should? And it can say, yes, it is, or no, it isn't, and here's what's not working. So it wouldn't be something that would be explicitly called from Juju, but it's something that an author or a user, really, a solutions user, can run to see if the services are running as they expected it to be. So that's the idea that we're doing. So unit testing to check your code for your hooks to make sure that they are written as you expected to. Functional testing to make sure that the charm is, once deployed, running as you'd expect it to. And then finally, this integration testing, which is more of like, how do I test an entire bundle to make sure the bundle is working as I expect it to. And so as a result, we'll be kind of shifting the role of Amulet a little bit. It'll be more geared towards bundle and integration testing is what it does really well now. And we'll be helping develop tools and to bridge the gap between now and when we get Juju Actions. Because Juju Actions will allow you to just run arbitrary, like Juju do health or Juju do test or Juju do am I ready kind of thing. So when that comes out, we'll be using that to leveraging that new piece of functionality of core to do these kind of checks and charms. And it'll be easier for charm authors to write tests because they won't have to worry about every single deployment scenario. And those who are building solutions can then write tests for those specific solutions using things like Amulet.
Excellent, excellent.
But
Now,
folks who are
the
writing
result of this...
just real quick on there, folks who are writing charms today and writing Amulet-based tests like maybe Matt has done, no need to worry there.
Yeah.
The harness will still exercise, and still if there's any test in the /test directory, you'll execute that. And if there's an Amulet-based test, which is using Amulet, it'll exercise that also. So don't worry that you're not losing any of that work that you have there. It's just that we're building upon that work to be able to have it do more bundle and more Juju actions when that's available on itself. But folks today who have been writing Amulet tests and using those, it'll exercise those just as it is today. So I want to make sure that's an important point that folks know.
So,
Are you going to question, Amir?
Yeah, I have a question. Regarding the last part is integration testing. That's where the solution user is interested about. Where the output going to be? Is the GUI, Juju GUI going to support that? Juju GUI going to have display the test result, or you have to go to the SSH to the system?
So that's something a little different. So when you're essentially the way you do it now with charms, where you run Juju test against it, you'll be basically running the same command against the bundle. So it'll stand the bundle up and test it. And and then it'll give you the results in your terminal whenever you ran it. It's not something that we'll be including in like the GUI or for production systems. It'll be just to test that your solution is working as you'd expect it to.
Oh, okay. I'm interested in production system. I'm
Right,
interested
so
in.
that's where the
Sorry.
health check would come into play. And that's something you'd run from the command line. You can do a health check against all your services to make sure they're running as you'd expect them to.
Okay, excellent.
So I guess on testing, the actions we have here is to be able to reference the original email thread set out, noting no objections, and then lay the plan out going forward. And I think maybe I can sync up with you and Marco that, since you'll have the spec that you'll have to present on Friday anyways for that plan going forward.
Right.
But if I don't think there's any objections to that list, we should update the docs to be able to have that in policy, and then have references to links like the Amulet documentation and how folks can be able to do that.
Sounds good.
Yep. And it really helps with our technical debt. We want folks to be able to be a core piece of Charms is that quality, just like test-driven development. Any of those pieces is, having not test be an afterthought, but just be saying this is the way we should develop, is always having good tests to be able to make sure we're exercising and making it better. So we will, Marco, you and I will take the to-do to be able to get that sent out to the community and get them the plan going forward, referencing the existing documentation, the roadmap going forward for extra stuff that will add on to it, and work on getting the policy updated. If there's any objections to that, please voice them on the juju@list.ubuntu.com, and post your reason there for the objection. We're really just trying to make the quality better here. We're really not trying to make it more cumbersome for folks, but be able to make it easier, and that's the whole reason of Amulet, is also as you're writing tests to be able to make that easy for yourself. I think that was the biggest point in policy change that I've seen lately. Is there any other policy changes that you'd like to review, Marco, Matt, or Amir?
Yeah, actually, I have one. We have a bullet point that says a charm must be entirely self-contained or depend only on reliable external services. The thing is we don't really define what a reliable external service is. I mean, that's kind of a myth. There is no truly reliable external service. Everything goes down.
Yep.
So what does that actually entail? It seems very vague. And it seems like the majority of charms that we have in the store will fail this policy.
Yeah. Well, and I think the policy document has evolved over time, and not all the charms were held to the same policy document, before. But
Well,
I
it's
think,
one of the first policies, so
is that right?
yeah, it's
Well,
one of the very first ones we had.
one of the challenges that I'm having is testing charms on a restricted network environment, and some of the charms just use wget or curl to get URLs from the upstream locations, and so they won't run on limited network environments. And so we have the concept of creating like fat charms, making charms that are actually self-contained, and not all of them are. And I've done an exercise going through all the current charms, trying to figure out all the network bits that they need to download from the network, and it is quite a bit. And I think that we need to at least define that or revisit that policy, because a lot of our current charms are not self-contained, and they cannot work on limited network environments. So I'd like to talk about that one too.
I think the intent there is to make sure that it at least can work. I think maybe what it was trying to do, it didn't know, I was trying to go towards the restricted environment. One thing that I think would be a best practice or I don't know if it's policy, it'd be nice if it was policy, but at least when we review things, is to list the dependencies it has if it's not self-contained, right? If you can't run this in an absolute, non-network environment, what services is going to call out to? Granted, I agree with you, Marco. Those services may themselves go down. Like if you're wgetting from a service and a web service, that service may go down. A lot of charms do that. That's just what it is. But I think it'd be important to be able to at least spell in the README, these are the services and the files and the sources that it's going to call out to. And so if someone's in a restricted environment, they can be able to at least know, okay, I need to pull down this tarball and this file, put it locally in my directory, and if they need to, have the charm look locally first rather rather than outside. That would have been helpful in a lot of the terms you took a look at, rather than just discovering what failed and looking at logs and saw, oh, it was trying to go to a key server, it was trying to get a tarball, it was trying to do this, that. I'm not sure if it's exactly the intent of that specific policy point. I would agree with Marco that it's very vague in what it means by being self-contained or relying on external service, but I think actually functional-wise, that I think the policy is there is to have quality for charms. I think the thing with quality with charms would be to make sure that if it is, how does it operate? You know, what files is it going to get in basically when it's not self-contained? Is that what you were kind of thinking as far as self-intent when you review as far as Marco, or what was your intent?
That's totally what I got from that. That's what it was originally meant to be. Is, you know, don't put it on like your own web hosting service, because that's not very reliable. Whereas Launchpad Librarian or GitHub are more theoretically more reliable sources. They'll last longer, at least. That's what I picked up from it. But that definition is curbed, and as Matt brought up, my point being that we have now a lot of people doing private cloud works with Juju and Charms that have very aggressive egress filtering, where you can't go out and just grab stuff from the web. I'm wondering if we should amend this policy to reflect that. Not as a requirement, because that would be, well, maybe as a requirement. I don't know. That seems to be where our strongest cloud stories are these days, is people setting up private clouds. Private OpenStacks are being set up all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe the requirement needs to be that you have to be able to have any assets that go outside can do that, but they all must be able to fall back on a local resource.
And I like what Antonio was saying, that we should document that in the README. So if not a policy, that should be a best practice, because you know, if somebody's trying to run these in a private cloud environment where they're egress filtering, you're just not going to be able to run some of these, because they're going all over the web trying to get stuff from the web. So I think we could even remove that or amend it, and then add something else that says, look, you know, we as probably a best practice at first, but say you must put in in the README, detail all the resources that you're using in this charm, so that people know ahead of time if they want to deploy this in their private cloud environment, they need to go out and download this other stuff separately, and where to put it and everything. So I think that's a good change that we need to make.
Our canonical IS department runs Juju themselves, and one thing that we've learned from their deployments are they create these offline charms, which basically has all the assets it needs in the actual local directory of the charm, because the network itself is restricted, and they want to make sure they can still deploy these, but they still need all these assets locally to the charm on the actual local file, so when the charm is deployed on, then uploaded to the server without reaching out to the internet on their intranet to be able to deploy correctly. And as we test unrestricted networks, we run into that, and it's it's painful for us to be able to guess what's working and what's not working. And so one of the things that Matt and I were talking about is, when we run into this, we would like to be able to do two things to solve it. Number one, document the README, what resources they need. So anyone else comes along and they're trying to replicate it and trying to do the same thing we're doing, they're not have to guess it. The second part, I think, is even a little bit, this is maybe more controversial, but it's what I think was the right thing to do in some of our charms, is in the install hooks, when it does go and look for external resources, be able to have a quick switch statement that says, look locally first, and that'll fail fast, and if it's not locally first, then reach out to the internet. And so those fail fast. You can just do an if file exists in this known directory, which could be your files directory or your data directory in your charm, which could be a common convention where you could have charm helpers for, whatever the case may be. That'll fast fail, and then look to the internet. And so folks who are on the internet, that'll just work. That'll be the charm won't change. But if they need to be offline, we could have the README say, put your files in the /data directory, whatever you want to call it, and then the charm will look there first. A lot of charms don't do that today, but and I don't know if we should make that a policy, but maybe definitely a best practice.
Yeah.
Could we make a charm helper to help that? Like have a charm helper that you give a list of the sources. First the local. If you fail local, go here, here. That would probably help with solving this problem if you have a charm helper for that.
Well, we also have new features landing in core that will resolve this, resources and such, where you can actually sync resources in an offline fashion and version them and stuff. So yeah, I think a charm helper would be great for that, but we also have features landing in core soon that will soonish. That'll
And you
help
could
that
keep
as well.
that logic there with the resources, or if you have that feature in core, still to be able to
Right.
say, look locally, either at a resource stream or at a file system, and if
Mhm.
that failed and not available, then continue on to the internet.
Yeah.
I
But
honestly think it should be the other way around, but the point remains the same.
Why is that,
timeout
Marco?
first.
Internet first, then local. You should always try for the latest version. If you can't get it, fall back to local. Otherwise, local will almost always be there unless the charm is not created properly.
Yeah,
Well,
but
Well, usually the latest doesn't mean it's stable.
yeah,
Well,
you
the
could have
latest.
another. You could have another config set parameter to be able to. So a charm author may say, I always want this version of a charm. We also encourage best practice to be able to have a config set to pull up the latest upstream. What I'm suggesting here, as far as being able to look locally first, is whatever the charm author suggests the version to pull. If it's on the internet, they'll fast locally first, so it doesn't add more time to a timeout on the network. Or if they're trying to do it in a network, they're gonna have to time out whatever that timeout is. We have to specify that it doesn't actually can't reach the service, and then when that falls back, that error is out. And then how do we treat that error? Do we treat it as a 404, or do we, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But the points are valid both ways, whether you look locally first or whether you look to
Sure.
the internet first. And then hopefully with a config set to be able to pull from upstream latest or whatever distro or PPA or whatever the case may be. So policy-wise, though, on that, I agree that first point that you said, that the intent to be self-contained should be updated to be able to say if it's, I mean, what should the policy be? Should the policy say that the intent should the charm should be try to be endeavor to be self-contained, and if it's not, it should list the resources that it's getting from the internet,
I
and as a
second
best
that.
practice, be able to make the charm be able to look for local resources.
I think that
I
should be up to the user.
That's what I'm
Okay.
asking here.
My point here is I think that should be up to the user
It's
to define.
absolutely, we're not defining it for the user, we're defining it for the charm author as far as what they allow in the charm. Right now, the user doesn't have the choice. Right now, a lot of the charms just look to the internet, and the user has no choice, and then they're in an offline environment, and the charm's failing. They have to go look at the logs, figure out why it's failing. It's failing because it's trying to go out to and get a GitHub repository, whatever the case may be. And they just don't know that because it's not on the README, and they don't have a choice to be able to do anything different because the charm is enabled to look locally at all. So my question is, as far as the policy, I think we should update that line, but what do we update that line with? Specifically to put the README has the resource locations, and the charm can pull from local resources, or is that a best practice?
Well, I think we should update the line to include, you should endeavor to be self-contained, but if you cannot be self-contained, list, the resources you need externally in the README, like you were saying. But even that is kind of vague. I think going the extra step and saying you have to look locally is a new. I think that's a new bullet. I think that's a new separate policy, I guess. I don't know if I'd make that a policy or just a best practice. I think the looking locally should be. I think it should be eventually in the policy, but I think we need to, there's a lot of charms out there that don't have that look locally. We'd have a lot of different things there. So I don't know.
In Hadoop, in the config of Hadoop charm, we have a source options. You can select during deployment
Yep.
developer, stable, or so. I think we need to make people do that. Provide in the config.yaml multiple sources so you can select during install. The user can select during install which one they want to do.
Okay, there's two different stories. There's a story of asking what source you want to pull from, and then being online or offline. So you could still have the config option that says pull from developer, stable, or whatever the third case may be. But all three sources could still pull from the internet, and we still have the original problem of being able to say, I want the developer version, and then giving the option of the user to put that tarball locally to the file system, so on deployment, it doesn't go and try to pull that source file from the internet. I mean, I think people in production, that it's very helpful for folks to be able to have that option. I'd be interested in seeing what Marco's opinion on it as far as. I would be a +1 for putting in the policy. I just don't know if that's too hard to do right now, or if we make it for best practice and then at 1410 we try to revisit it, or put it out to the list and see if folks would be +1 or be against that. I mean, obviously we should do everything to the list here before we make any decisions. But do you think this is even worth putting to the list to say for that line, change it to put in the README and have your charm look locally to be able to have policy for that? Your thoughts, Marco?
Works for me.
So let's put it out to policy, see what folks say. If there's a strong opinion against having charms look locally, we'll at least put it for best practices and then maybe revisit it again at 1410. I think there's a lot of merits for it looking locally.
Yep.
Right. It gives a lot more flexibility.
Okay, cool. So those are the two things out to the list. Any other policy points we should revisit?
What about this app armor one? Should make use of app armor to increase security. I don't see a lot of charms doing that right now.
That's a good point.
Well, that's why it's a should and not a must, because we wouldn't have a lot of charms that are must.
Okay.
It's still a good policy to have. App armor is great for sandboxing stuff. Not everything fits into an app armor profile, but we really don't have good tutorials on app armor in charms, rather, not just in general. But we should really look at.
We could get better there. In general,
we could definitely improve that story. We just haven't really talked much about how to do app armor in charms and how to make that really work for you. But not too terribly difficult. Just not a lot of people know how to use them.
Maybe we should put that on our charm school ourselves for us to learn.
Yeah, I think so. That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Charm school app armors.
So the next one that I wanted to bring up is the interfaces paragraph. So it says here, interfaces. Charm should only implement a new interface when existing interfaces are insufficient to achieve the goal of the charm. Interfaces that have an official requires provides in the charm store cannot be changed by adding required fields or removing existing fields. New optional fields can be added at any time. The charm store series denotes the OS. Oh, that's nothing. That's fine. So this is the policy on interfaces, and we've had a lot of discussions on interfaces in general these last couple of years. Probably not a lot of time to rehash in here, but I think it's worth bringing up on the list and discussing further what it actually means to extend an interface, because a lot of people have some confusion on what that means. And the prime example is the HTTP interface, which when you look at the discussions about how certain charms have optional fields that are included, it actually fits within this policy still. But it still is a point of contention in the community for what it means to extend an interface. So I think it's worth bringing up and discussing this paragraph in more detail.
As far as whether you create a new interface or whether you extend the existing one?
Right.
But I'd also like to bring up when is it okay to take them to remove them, right? We had a discussion about one of our charms, the Elasticsearch, or was it a different one, that we were trying to remove some relations that were redundant and or no longer relevant, right? I think we were talking. Kapil was talking about removing some of the relation or the interfaces.
That's fine because you're changing the charm. You're not redefining the interface itself. This is more along the lines of, I want to make these 3 new keys a required key for this relation. Which is what you should do is create a new relation, but it locks down the point of what if the relation is wrong? What if it's lacking and it actually should have these additional values? There's really no path for improving an interface unless you go through and basically make a whole bunch of changes at once. So
I see.
The policy is interesting, but I'd like to get it clarified so people understand what the policy is and if it needs to change, because people have there's still a bit of contention around this.
So Marco, educate me here. How that would affect on existing bundles. If there is a bundle already there, designed based on the previous interface, if you change it, do you have to go change the bundle? Modify the bundle?
What do you mean? The interface shouldn't correlate to a bundle, really.
Well, don't you use it for relationships?
Well,
Would it
yeah.
affect it?
So what the policy says is that you can't make any new keys required or remove keys from an interface spec. So you can't just say that suddenly the MySQL charm no longer provides a user. That no longer exists. Instead, I'm just going to call it database username instead. You can't do that in relations, what the policy says. But you can create optional fields where it's not required, but if it's supplied to you, then you can do further actions on them. So it's like, it basically is overloading the interface. So for HTTP, for instance, it says HTTP interface will always have a host name and a port. But there's a charm that allows you to specify different things about the load balancer pool that you want to put it into. They're all optional. And so HA proxy, when you connect to it, will say, if you have these additional configuration values that are all optional, I'll do these actions. So this policy seems to say that that's okay to do that. But the thing is it technically changes the definition of this interface. So there's a lot of discussion and contention about, should this be a new interface, or should we update the HTTP interface, or should we just leave it as it is? What do we do with this policy? But as far as changing, just outright changing the keys and values that are sent on an interface, that's not okay. I don't think it'll ever be okay.
Because you break a lot of charms in that.
Yeah, you break a lot of things.
Okay, so interfaces, test, look locally. Charm schools for AppArmor. JD Strand in Ubuntu UDS DevOps 1 had a quick comment. And I'm not sure how to post this here on the Hangout itself for it to be available, but he has a link, wiki.apparmor.net at the index.php documentation that has some information around the actual. That'd be great. Thank you, Marco. Wiki.apparmor.net has some just general AppArmor information. Profiling with AppArmor is again at that same site. Instead of at documentation, though, it's profiling underscore by underscore hand. Marco also put that here. And so, and also, as we said, we'll try to have a charm school around AppArmor, and Jimmy has some folks that we might be able to work with on the Ubuntu security team to be able to help us get a lot stronger there. So definitely a charm school topic we'll have. We'll try to check to see when the security team is available to be able to assist with that, since they're the experts in that area. And then we'll also take a look at ourselves on the reference and documentation, maybe even putting some of these as we develop a workflow around AppArmor. Specifically, if it's policy, we should have something in our docs as far as how someone can create an AppArmor profile in a charm and what that looks like, or as a reference material, how they could do that. I think that'd be a huge plus that we should add to our documentation.
Totally.
Any other points on policy?
I don't have anything else to complain about.
I think those are good to be able to. I think it's always good to be able to look at the policy, and as we learn more and as we see more people learning it, it's good to be able to say what the whole policy was specifically for the folks to be able to use it to help improve their quality, right? That's the whole idea of policy, is to make sure it. So policy should always serve the users, but it should be revisited and took a look at and make sure we're doing the right things. And I think that's where we've seen tests and look locally and interfaces come out. So we'll bring those to the list, make sure it's discussed there, and then hitting that conversation there, we'll update the policy accordingly. We'll have the charm school to be able to have we'll look at the AppArmors, and we'll look at the docs to be able to have a 2 on that for AppArmor. But if there's no policy change, the next one in a couple minutes is just to mention our audit. And so what we've been trying to do is the audit.
The great audit. Charm audit.
2013, 2014. So here's where we're at. Everything that's in eye bleeding yellow is. And Marco, could you click on
Yep.
Matt's screen?
Already did.
Cool. So everything that's in yellow is what we need to get done. And we'll reference a list again. We should email this on this to be able to let them know where the link is at. This is also started back in December. These are sorted by downloaded charms, and so we still have a lot of the of the charms to go through. The audit is taking a look at the README, the description, the examples, make sure it passes proof. This is, it has a test written in it. The test passed. There's an icon, adheres to charm policy, and the charm features are filled out, which you may have to have a charmer help fill those out. It's basically making sure that the charm has good documentation for it as far as how someone could deploy it. It works as says it does, and has tests in there. And then make sure it looks nice and neat with an icon. And so again, this is just making sure as part of our quality, making sure those has it. Anyone can do this. If someone's looking to be able to get started on Juju, and they're just saying, hey, I just want to learn more about it and get more plugged into the community, this is a great way to start. Just looking at the README and the description, deploying the service, updating the README to see if it actually does that correctly is a great way to do it. Charm Tools has a great template that we've been trying to follow in the README. If you go to Charm Create, right, it'll give you an example template, and you can use that template.
Actually run Charm Add README. It'll just add a README.
Oh, okay, perfect. You can do Charm Add README. That'll give you the template we've been trying to follow, which has the major sections. That's in Charm Tools. If you apt-get Charm Tools on Ubuntu, Charm-Tools, you'll get that, and then just run Charm space Add space README. You'll get a README template to look at it. So that's an easy way to get started to see if it passed, the README is up to date and appropriately describes it, and then start getting more into writing tests for it. Or if you're a designer out there, making some nice icons for those out there. And then just emailing a list to say, hey, I did this. The spreadsheet itself, we'll send a link out to, but it's world readable too, and world writable. So many hands make small work, but little, there's a few folks here doing it. We'll be longer. We like to be able to accomplish this soon, so we can make sure we just have that good quality in there. We put charm testing through our automated infrastructure, and then we can just make sure we go through there. So really a good push on the improving the quality in our charm store. Anything you'd like to add on that, Matt, Amir, or Marco?
Nope.
Please help. We have a lot of charms that we have to go back and audit. And basically, we just want to make them all high quality, and we're really trying hard to put tests on them, make sure that the READMEs are good. A lot of these charms got in under different policies and different guidelines, so they don't all have great READMEs, and we need help there. We need help, writing amulet tests for it. And if you know one of these charms really well, like if you know OwnCloud or you know Nagios, and you're expert on that, we would really appreciate your help, having to figure out if Zookeeper is running correctly or something. We need the experts to write the tests so that we can tell if Zookeeper is running correctly or whatever. Varnish or Puppet. Those are charms that we need to help to make sure that they're high quality, so that. And if we have tests, we can run them automatically and test them automatically, and this will help get promoted to the next series like Trusty. And so if we have automated tests, we can test if it runs on Precise, and if it runs on Trusty, we can push these forward to the next release.
Plus one to what everything Matt said. That's really good ways to get started in there, I think.
Yeah, please help. We need it.
Any other closing remarks around policy or audits? Marco, as you're hosting this one, do you want to close us out then?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and close this out. So if you have any questions about this, about Charm Store policy, about the audit, how to get involved, you can find us on #Juju on Freenode. The mailing list is juju@list.ubuntu.com. You can always ask questions at askubuntu.com, tag Juju. And with that, I think we're good. We'll see. For those of you following along, we'll have some updated lists, mails out to the mailing list to discuss these different policy changes. Feel free to provide your feedback, other questions you have there. With that, I think we're good. Thank you guys for joining and helping me out, Amir, Antonio, and Matt, and we'll see you guys in the next session.
Thanks.
Yeah. Bye.